Neural integration I, sensory pathways and the somatic nervous system. Chapter 15, Part 2. Neural integration I, sensory pathways and the somatic nervous system. Section 15-3 The organization of sensory pathways. First, second, and third-order neurons. First-order neurons. Sensory neurons that deliver sensory information to the CNS. Second-order neurons. First-order neurons synapsons in the brain or spinal cord. Third-order neurons. Found in the thalamus. Second-order neurons synapse on these. Somatic sensory pathways. Three major pathways carry sensory information. Posterior column pathway, anterolateral pathway, spinocerebellar pathway. Figure 15.6 Sensory pathways and ascending tracts in the spinal cord. Posterior column pathway carries fine touch, pressure and proprioceptive sensations. Axons ascend within the fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. Relay information to the thalamus via the medial lemniscus. Decussation. Figure 15.8 The posterior column pathway and the spinothalamic tracts. Figure 15.8a, b, anterolateral pathway. Carries poorly localized sensations of touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. Axons decussate in the spinal cord and ascend within the anterior and lateral spinothalamic tracts. Headed toward the ventral nuclei of the thalamus. Figure 15.8 The posterior column pathway and the spinothalamic tracts. Figure 15.8c. Spinocerebellar pathway. Includes the posterior and anterior spinocerebellar tracts. Carries sensation to the cerebellum concerning position of muscles, tendons and joints. Figure 15.9 The spinocerebellar pathway. Visceral sensory pathways. Carry information collected by interoceptors. Information from cranial nerves V, 7, 9 and 10 delivered to solitary nucleus in medulla oblongata. Dorsal roots of spinal nerves T1, L2 carry visceral sensory information from organs between the diaphragm and pelvis. Dorsal roots of spinal nerves S2, S4 carry sensory information below this area. Section 15-4 The somatic nervous system. Somatic motor pathways. Upper motor neuron. Cell body lies in a CNS processing center. Lower motor neuron. Cell body located in a motor nucleus of the brain or spinal cord. Figure 15.10 Descending, motor, tracts in the spinal cord. The corticospinal pathway provides voluntary skeletal muscle control. Corticobulbar tracts terminate at cranial nerve nuclei. Corticospinal tracts synapse on motor neurons in the anterior gray horns of the spinal cord. Visible along medulla as pyramids. Pyramids. Most of the axons decussate to enter the descending lateral corticospinal tracts. Those that do not cross over enter the anterior corticospinal tracts. Provide rapid direct method for controlling skeletal muscle. Figure 15.11 The corticospinal pathway. Medial and lateral pathways. The medial and lateral pathways issue motor commands as a result of subconscious processing. Medial pathway primarily controls gross movements of the trunk and proximal limbs. Includes the vestibulospinal tracts, tectospinal tracts and reticulospinal tracts. Lateral pathways. Lateral pathway controls muscle tone and movements of the distal muscles of the upper limbs. Rubrospinal tracts, the basal nuclei and cerebellum. Basal nuclei adjust motor commands issued in other processing centers. provide background patterns of movement involved in voluntary motor movements. Cerebellum monitors proprioceptive information, visual information and vestibular sensations. Control and responses levels of processing and motor control. Spinal and cranial reflexes provide rapid, involuntary, pre-programmed responses. Voluntary responses, more complex, require more time to prepare and execute. Figure 15.12 Centers of somatic motor control. During development, spinal and cranial reflexes are first to appear. Complex reflexes develop as CNS matures and brain grows.